And you know a lot of Bryan Kohberger. Your book really goes into the type of person he was from high school to when the murders took place. And it was really shocking when he ended up ultimately pleading guilty because from the start, he said he was innocent. Ann Taylor, his attorney, was saying Bryan Kohberger's innocent. Now he's pleading guilty to all four murders, first degree, and one count of burglary. But in return, he's in jail for life now, no possibility of parole, but the death penalty is off the table. Based on the Bryan Kohberger you know, are you surprised by this? Because you detail accounts of him thinking he's the smartest person in the room. He's a type of person that needs to get the last word in. He thinks he's the most intelligent. So, what do you make of this twist?
I think by this plea deal, Bryan Kohberger sees himself as having the last laugh, actually. Look at his life. He started out as a poor student. He was a heroin addict. He was overweight, and yet he finds the will to transform himself. He transforms himself. He loses 125 pounds, starts working out, turns his body into a fortress. He moves from a community college, a 2-year community college, to a 4-year liberal arts college at the South, and then to a distinguished graduate program at Washington State University. He finds the will to kick heroin. He does all these transformative things. And yet, once he gets out to Washington State, he realizes, in effect, biology is destiny. He can't really change who he is. He will always never be able to fit into the real world. And so I believe, and this is speculation, his fascination with crime led him to see if he could commit the perfect crime. And now he got close. He got very close, except for that one mistake. But now when he's in prison, I think after a while he'll be getting bored, and he now will become this forensic psychologist that he always wanted to be. He will be able to talk to other people in the field. He will be a peer with them. They will come to his jail cell. He will give interviews, and he will now expand on how he committed these crimes. He will now become an authority. And I think that would be a very fulfilling life for him. He'll be in a sheltered world, and he'll be able to achieve his ambition of accomplishing something. In his twisted way, I think he's going to come out, I hate to say this, a winner in this case.
And you said before, he's the type of person that was living in the shadows. Even after he kicked heroin, even after he dropped all that weight, he went to a pool party when he first got to Washington State University, and he wasn't being paid really any attention. Witnesses there kind of were creeped out by him. They thought, oh, that's just kind of that weird guy. Some of them were talking to him to be polite. Others were just kind of weirded out by the whole social interaction. And Steve Gonsalves, who is Kaylee Gonsalves's father, agrees with you there. He thinks that Bryan Kohberger is now just going to drip, drip, drip information and interviews, exclusive interviews after once he's in jail now, since he's pleaded guilty. But why now? Why do you think he decided to say, hey, right before this goes to trial, I'm just going to plead guilty? Do you think the defense just said, believed now he's guilty?
Well, my reporting gave me this insight into what had happened. Earlier on in the case, a couple of months ago, the defense team realized my client's going to wind up in front of a firing squad. So they approached Bryan Kohberger and said, you need to take a plea deal. He called up his mother, and according to the reporting I had, his mother said no. Whether she believed he was innocent, she didn't, or maybe she just didn't want to face the fact that her son was a monster. She said no. So Bryan told his team no plea deal. Then, after the two recent rulings that we discussed earlier in June, where they threw out the alibi, they threw out the alternate perpetrator defense, Bryan Kohberger's team approached him again. And now something else had happened. There had been a special, Dateline special, I think it aired in mid-May. I was part of that team, but a very small role. I talked a bit, did a little bit of investigation, but they uncovered one really interesting fact. 2 hours after the murders occurred, at approximately 6 a.m. in the morning, Bryan Kohberger called a phone registered to his father. According to my reporting, he had spoken with his mother for 54 minutes, nearly an hour. And in the course of that conversation, no one knows what was said except Kohberger and whomever he spoke to. However, once this phone call was made public, Kohberger's parents knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that the prosecution had knowledge of this call and that they would bring this call up in the courtroom case. They would have to go on the stand and testify under oath as to what was said and what suspicions they might have had about their son's actions. And when they explained this to their son now began to realize nothing akin to remorse in any way that you and I might understand it, but he did feel something towards his parents, and he did not want to put them in a situation that would jeopardize them legally. So when his defense team came to him and said it's time to cut a deal, he factored in the situation his parents were in, and also the fact that he'd be facing the long guns of a firing squad. And he said, "Well, it makes more sense to try to get a deal." So they approached the prosecution. Why the prosecution gave in, that to me left me stunned. As we said earlier, they were holding all the cards. They've been at this for 2.5 years, and I couldn't quite at first understand why they did this. Yet the more I thought of it, it seemed like the men in power, honorable men in Idaho, had been wanting to move this case away as quickly as possible. I mean, look at the history. The first judge in the case, Judge John Judge, as soon as he could, he moved the case from Moscow to Boise, and then he could have gone with the case. He could have been the presiding judge of the trial. He said, "No, I don't want this," and in fact retired from the bench. Then there was the police chief Fry. He led the 7-week manhunt that captured Kohberger. He cried on national television with grief and elation, a mixture of both when Kohberger's arrest was announced. And then, rather perfunctorily, he retired from the police department in Moscow. He now is a police chief in Washington State. He had enough. And then the University of Idaho itself, what happened to the murder house? They couldn't wait to demolish it. They sent bulldozers in at 6 a.m, knocked it all down as if they could forget about it. I think honorable men in Idaho just wanted to move on. And the prosecutor, Bill Thompson, who'd been living with this case for 2.5 years, he felt enough is enough. The prospect of a 3-month trial was just too dispiriting. And he just didn't have the appetite to fight. Perhaps he wanted to spend the summer going fishing rather than battling in a courtroom over such a horrific case.
I want to get back to the fact that Bryan Kohberger's parents might have had to take this stand because in your book, I mean, one of the most fascinating elements is you detail this car ride that Bryan Kohberger and his father Michael have from Washington State to their home in Pennsylvania, cross-country trip. And Bryan Kohberger's father Michael, he was concerned enough about his son that he flew out there to make this trip. And throughout your reporting, you say that he was having some thoughts. There was a kernel of doubt in his mind that, hey, maybe my son could potentially have somehow been involved with this. He had this sick feeling in his stomach all throughout the trip across the country. Then you get to their home in Pennsylvania, and his sister, his other daughter, Bryan Kohberger's sister, tells him, hey, I saw Bryan scrubbing out his car with a vacuum with latex gloves on. I saw him digging through the trash and separating the trash, separating his own trash. He also was dumping the trash in his neighbor's can. And Michael Kohberger, the father, kind of ignored this. Was the concern then, if he was on the stand, if the parents were on the stand, they would perjure themselves and say, hey, no, he might have had some troubles in his childhood, but he's a good person, he wouldn't do this? Or the other fact that they could tell the truth and voice their concerns. What do you think was the more likely route there?
I think you raise an interesting point. Let's go back to the trip they take across America. Bryan Kohberger's father, who's 68 years old, flies out to drive back across country with his son just a couple of weeks after the murders. It's an expense for a family. The father was a custodial engineer at a local high school. He had been bankrupt twice, but he feels it's important enough to make this trip with his 28-year-old son that he has to go out there. As soon as he arrives, Michael Kohberger, the father, in Washington State, he begins to realize that his son, something's up. His son's in a keyed up state. He's seen this problematic Bryan before, and he knows to be wary. He also knows that just 9 miles away from where his son is living, 4 young people were horribly murdered. Does he have suspicions at this point? Well, they begin to build. The son changes the route, the way they're going to go home. Uh, Twice during the trip, they are stopped by Indiana State Patrolmen in a traffic stop, but there are flashing lights, and his father, in his mind, it's almost as if he's wondering, could they be coming for my son? I mean, it's a moment filled with high drama. And also, they're sitting shoulder to shoulder in a white Hyundai Elantra. And every policeman in the country is looking for a white Hyundai Elantra that's involved in this crime. And here he has his problematic son. So he's putting the pieces together as they drive across country to Pennsylvania. He can't quite get there. It's too large a moment for him to confront directly. And when he gets back to Pennsylvania, and his sister tells him, well, Dad, I think we might have a problem with Bryan. He again just sort of, according to what I've been told, shrugs and leaves the room. He can't confront it. But if there were a trial, he would have to go on the stand. Other family members would have to go on the stand, and they would have to testify to what they'd seen and what they had heard and what they had thought. And this might have put them in legal jeopardy for not reporting Bryan sooner.